My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Birmingham. Minister, procedural orders of continuing effect 20 on page 138 of the Senate's standing orders requires, inter alia, that the full text of any bilateral or plurilateral agreement with other countries is to be laid on the table at least 14 days before signing. This was not done with the recently signed Trans-Pacific Partnership TPP-11 agreement or with the agreements with China, Korea and Japan. In fact, these agreements were presented to the Senate as a fait accompli, giving the Senate no opportunity to debate the agreement and fulfil its responsibilities to the Australian people. This rule has been in place since 11th of December 2013. Would the Minister explain why he did not comply with the procedural order of continuing effect 20 with regard to the TPP-11 and these other arrangements? These other agreements.
The Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Hanson for her question. I will take on notice details in relation to your question, Senator Hanson. I'm not aware of the precise dates at which tabling of the different agreements to which you've referred were undertaken. I am, of course, aware that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, the Japan-Australia Free Trade Agreement, the agreement with South Korea all went through the normal parliamentary process of exhaustive examination through the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, had in other instances multiple inquiries of different parliamentary and Senate committees. The government provided the standard national interest analysis in relation to each of those cases, and indeed there were often other instances of modelling that was undertaken. For example, in relation to the TPP, modelling that demonstrated that Australia's national income would be some $15 billion or so higher per annum by 2030 as a result of the comprehensive and progressive agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership coming into force. And the government is very proud of the fact that under us we have provided greater access for Australian farmers and Australian businesses to more markets around the world. When we were elected, just 20-odd% of Australian goods and services could get tariff-free or preferential access into key export markets. That figure now stands closer to 70%. What that means is that our farmers and our businesses are more competitive. They can get their goods into more export markets and they can sell their goods and services at a more competitive rate in those export markets with lower tariffs, which means lower taxes on those goods and services. This is good news, and it's what has helped to fuel the growth of our economy over the last few years, ensuring our economic growth outstrips that of other G7 nations, ensuring our jobs growth has been at record highs and providing more opportunities for more Australian families.
Senator Hanson, a supplementary question.
Well, Minister, I can say that you didn't present it to the table under the procedural orders. So, is the Minister at all aware of how concerned the people of Australia are about free trade agreements, their negative impact on our car, footwear, clothing and white goods industries, to name a few, and how this affects the livelihoods of many Australians that are losing their jobs due to it, and under your free trade agreement that you are bringing 5,000 workers into the country?
Order. Senator Birmingham.
Mr President, thank you. Look, I acknowledge, as indeed the government always has, that when there are instances of economic change, that presents challenges, and that not every corner of Australia always benefits from every element of growth occurring at the same time. However, under our government over the last 5.5 years, we've seen more than 1.1 million jobs created and added to. Last year we saw the fastest growth in youth employment ever in recorded history in Australia. Now, this doesn't just happen by accident. The government creates the type of environment in which businesses can grow and invest. And a key way in which Australian businesses grow and invest is by being able to sell more goods, not just to each other, but to other consumers in the rest of the world. And that's what we've seen under our government. The growth in goods exports, the growth in services exports, creating more job opportunities for more Australians.
Senator Hanson, a final supplementary question.
Does the Minister hold the rules of the Senate in such little regard that he feels he does not need to comply with them? And will he be tabling the Indonesia Free Trade Agreement as per...
And this is exactly where the entire Senate exchange stops being a normal policy discussion and turns into a full-blown accountability clash inside Parliament. Because the moment Senator Hansen raises the issue of procedural orders and the requirement to table full trade agreement texts 14 days before signing, the argument immediately shifts away from process and straight into political defense mode. Senator Birmingham is put on the spot with a very direct allegation that key trade agreements like TPP-11 and others were effectively pushed through without the Senate getting the proper opportunity to fully scrutinize them under established procedural rules. And instead of directly engaging with that core procedural breach, the response moves into a broad justification of process already followed: committee reviews, national interest analysis, and economic benefits. And this is where the tension starts building. Because the question is not just about whether trade agreements are good or bad. The question being raised is much more specific. Did the government follow the Senate's own procedural rules before finalizing these major international agreements? That's the pressure point. Senator Hansen keeps pushing it further, shifting the focus from process to impact, raising concerns about job losses, domestic industries like automotive, footwear, clothing, and manufacturing, and the wider economic consequences that people feel on the ground. The exchange becomes less about paperwork in Parliament and more about real-world consequences for workers. But again, the response pulls back into macro-level economic outcomes: jobs growth numbers, export expansion, youth employment statistics, and overall economic performance under the government's trade policy. So what you end up seeing is two completely different arguments running in parallel. One side is focused on procedure, transparency, and parliamentary compliance. The other side is focused on economic outcomes, trade benefits, and national growth metrics. And neither side fully steps into the other's framing. Then comes the final escalation. The question about whether the minister has disregard for Senate rules and whether future agreements, like the Indonesia Free Trade Agreement, will be tabled in accordance with procedural orders. And again, the response does not directly concede any procedural breach. It doubles down on the idea that all agreements went through exhaustive parliamentary processes, committee scrutiny, and deliver measurable national benefits, reinforced by industry support and economic indicators. So by the end of this exchange, what stands out is not a clear admission or denial, but a complete collision of narratives. Procedural accountability versus economic justification. Senate rules versus executive trade policy execution. Process compliance versus outcome-based defense. And that's exactly why this moment becomes politically explosive in perception. Because viewers are left to decide one thing: was this a legitimate exercise of trade governance, or a bypass of parliamentary scrutiny justified by economic results? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should major international agreements face stricter Senate enforcement before being signed?